This week on Painting Lines.
Another guy that could have been the player of the year is Sinner. In terms of guys that outperformed probably expectations, he probably was the number one guy. This season was insane for Djokovic, and I don't think it was even his best year,
Jeez.
which is just crazy to say. Djokovic was just like, no, 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 no. I'm still the king.
And that Cincinnati final will go down in history. Like, that is monumental.
Welcome to the Painting Lines podcast, your one-stop shop for all things tennis. Join Erik and Aidan in their discussion for updates on news and pop culture, and from hot takes to betting, they've got you covered.
Ready? Play. Welcome back to Painting Lines. Last week, we gave our recap of the Next Gen Finals, and this week, we're going to be doing our season awards for the 2023 ATP season as a whole. So overall, I thought it was a pretty solid, pretty entertaining season. What do you think, Erik?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely thought it was a great year. Pretty sad that it's over. I've kind of just found myself, trying to watch tennis highlights, not really finding much. But about the year, man, we saw some epic matches, some retirements, injuries, comebacks, new title winners, a Tsitsipas Baldoza relationship, which I'm pretty excited about. Some coaching changes. Boris Becker's back on the tour. That's exciting. A lot of drama. We even saw a Netflix series. And then ultimately, the tour was still dominated by a 36-year-old Novak Djokovic, which, to be honest, I was surprised about. I don't know about you. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that Djokovic is still able to dominate at his age is pretty insane. But even though Djokovic still dominated, we saw like the people that he's going to be passing it over to when he eventually does retire. And it seems like the tennis world's going to be left in good hands.
I think so too. Do you have a favorite moment from the year?
Favorite moment of the year, I think kind of ties into something I'm going to talk about later. But
Mhm.
I think when Djokovic won in Cincinnati, I think that was my favorite moment of the year because it brought him back almost because in the first half of the year, Alcaraz really seemed like he was stepping up to that next level. He was taking over. He won Wimbledon, and it was like, is Djokovic done? Is this the passing of the torch right here, this Wimbledon final? And then Djokovic was just like, no, 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 no. I'm still the king, and wins this Masters 1000 final in an epic match, and then kind of dominates the remainder of the year too. So that's I think my favorite moment because it was such a critical turning point.
Yeah, that's a great point because, like I said, I was surprised that the tour was dominated by Novak. But then you said it right there. Like, once that Wimbledon loss happened, he just kind of turned it around. And that Cincinnati final will go down in history. Like, that is monumental. But for me, I mean, my favorite, I guess, thing, not really a moment, but my favorite thing of the year was just the emergence of Ben Shelton. Like, to me, that was so exciting to see him kind of come into his own and potentially be the next top American because even if he isn't going to win a slam himself in the next couple of years, he's still pushing the other Americans to be better. Like, we brought this up before, some of those guys were considering him a little brother, but now he's beating them. So I'm pumped to see what the future has in store for Ben.
Yeah, and he has such a momentum behind him that, like you said, he can maybe push these guys because it seemed like the Americans had almost topped out. Like, I mean, obviously it's a crazy level to top out at, like being a top 10 player essentially. But Fritz, Tiafo, Tommy Paul didn't seem like they were going to really step it up to that next level to be maybe a top 5 guy in the world. And now with Ben Shelton pushing them and all the momentum he has behind him, maybe they'll be able to up their games too now that they see him kind of breathing down their necks.
Yeah, exciting things in store. So do you want to jump into the awards?
Yeah, sounds good. So, I mean, like any awards show, yeah, we're just going to go through category by category, break down our picks, and also include some honorable mentions for the year, just our ideas of what the best things were for each of these categories. So, up first, the newcomer of the year. For me, my pick is Arthur Field. Had a huge rise in ranking, went up over 200 spots, won his first ATP title, and made it into the top 40, which is a pretty significant jump to make it into because there are other guys that made it all the way into the top 100. But I think the top 40 is a crazy jump because there were other guys like Alex Mickelson who had an incredible year. But if you look at the point difference, Fields had almost double Mickelson's ranking points. So that's why I'm going with him for my newcomer of the year.
Yeah, I mean, That's kind of a hard one to beat, but I'm just gonna go with Alex Mickelson. Like you said, the dude just shot up like crazy, ranking wise. Kind of came out of nowhere. It's pretty interesting to see the fact that he's so big, he's so powerful, and he just kind of gets grouped into that serve bot category as an American tennis player. But I think he is my newcomer of the year just because of what he did in Rhode Island, where he, really put his face on the map there. And the fact that you go over 500 places in less than a year is pretty outstanding.
100%. I think he definitely is like deserving of being like one of our picks because he essentially turned pro halfway through this year and now he's in the top 100 players in the world. That's pretty crazy because Fields obviously turned pro a couple years ago. They're the same age, but Mickelson turned pro this year. Fields has had a couple years to maybe kind of adjust to the tour, even though this was really his time coming onto the scene.
Mhm. So let me ask you this. Mickelson was thinking about going to college, correct? And then he decided not to, whereas Fields, there was no shot he was going to college. He was going straight to professional.
Yeah. And I think that's just because of how essentially just how France is set up in terms of
Mhm.
athletics versus the US. Like in the US, going to college and playing a college sport is a defined pathway versus in countries like France, if there's a top level player, they're saying you're going pro immediately. They're not thinking, oh, you're going to go play at university. And I think that's just has to do with the fact that I don't think university sports is necessarily as big of a thing in Europe as
Mhm.
it is in the US.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking up on that, I think so. You know how a lot of college tennis is, a lot of the teams are made up of, I guess, international students. I think it's because if you're not the best in your country, then you kind of get neglected. Like there really is no, I guess, home for you because they just groom the top players. So I think that's a good opportunity for international students to come over to the US to continue their career and play in college.
Yeah, I think there is a level where it's like either you're going pro or you're not if you're in another
Mhm.
country. And so if you're in that section where they're like you're below that cutoff, you can come to the US and continue to develop your game at a really high level and get good competition and improve. And maybe once you finish college, you'll be good enough to actually go play on the tour.
Uh-huh. So do you have an honorable mention for this or no?
I couldn't think of one to be honest. I felt like those guys kind of stood out as the two biggest newcomers in my book.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what everyone else thinks too. So definitely let us know.
Yeah, 100%. But up next, best tournament performance. I had to go with Shelton, US Open. It's his home tournament, obviously. He'd had that massive run in Australia, but for the rest of the year, he didn't really have that crazy of a year. And then he shows up here, and I think I bet on him to lose in the second round against Team. Team withdraws after the first set, but he also had some tough wins in that tournament. It wasn't like he had an easy draw. He beat Tommy Paul and Tiafoe, who are great players, but it's early rounds. He beat guys like Kachin and Karatsev, who are like solid players. So he had an excellent run to get there. And I think that third set against Djokovic was pretty close. And I think if he'd won that third set, it could have been a critical turning point because I think it could have been a mental, oh, I can beat this guy moment. Unfortunately, he didn't get it done, but I think that was the best tournament performance of the year.
Mhm. I think it's a good choice. I think it's a good pick. And just like you, I picked someone who didn't necessarily win the tournament, but I still thought had, a performance of the year. And that was Yannick Sinner at the ATP finals.
Mm.
Like this was a tournament of the top 8 guys, and he won his first 4 matches and did beat Djokovic, but then eventually lost to him in the final. Kind of used that momentum to build that up into beating Djokovic in the Davis Cup. So Sinner had a great ATP finals, even though he did not win.
Yeah, and I mean, also like if this was a Grand Slam, he would have eliminated Djokovic, wouldn't have
Yeah.
had to play him in the final. So
Yeah.
that's one aspect of it. But also, I think that you can't undervalue how tough it is to beat other top 8 guys because these guys are such a next level of player. Beating for the top 8 guys, pretty insane. And I think, yeah, a great pick for best tournament performance.
Yeah, and according to Tsitsipas, it's bigger than a Grand Slam, right? Winning the ATP
Yeah.
finals.
Yeah, I mean, he might be biased, but
Yeah.
yeah. And then I mean, honorable mentions for this. I also think Alcaraz at Wimbledon did not have an easy path to the final. Had to beat Jari, Berrettini, former finalist, Runa, Medvedev, and Djokovic. So obviously tough players and beating Djokovic in the final for the first time in however long. That's crazy. So he didn't get a layup and had to win that final in a spectacular match.
Yeah, my honorable mention was Nori at Rio. He didn't have like the most insane draw. It wasn't really a tough draw, but I'm giving credit to him because he had lost to Alcaraz the week before in Buenos Aires in the final. And to come back and beat him after being down a set and a break, I think that deserves an honorable mention, at least for best tournament performance of the year.
Yeah. And I mean, beating Alcaraz in any capacity is a huge accomplishment. Beating him in a final is pretty
Mhm.
insane.
Yeah, on clay too.
Exactly. Somewhere where Alcaraz is very comfortable.
Hmm.
Moving on, let's go to comeback player of the year. So I had to go with Alex Zverev. Obviously, he had that massive injury in the 2022 French Open against Nadal, missed the second half of that year after he got his surgery. And then he comes back onto the tour this year and is able to make a few deep runs and eventually qualify for the ATP finals. He also won 2 tournaments in Hamburg and Chengdu. So I just think it's a crazy accomplishment to be able to come back, win titles, make deep runs after having such a crazy injury the year before. I don't think that many people had very high expectations on Zverev coming into this year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. He's also my pick for comeback player of the year. I think, what do you think's more impressive for him to come back and make it to the ATP finals or win those 2 titles?
Well, I think that making the ATP finals
Yeah.
just signals that he was a top level of player for like most of the year, which is like a huge accomplishment. Winning those 2 titles shows that he still has that peak level. So I think they're
Mhm.
both impressive in their own way.
Yeah, and I think especially coming back after a gruesome injury like that, a lot of players tend to never be the same because they get scared. They are afraid to take chances, but Zverev seemed to just put that behind him and was full speed ahead.
Yeah,
Because you know how a
exactly.
lot of players you get tentative, right?
Yeah,
You're like,
you're
oh, I
worried
don't
to
want
push full out on like your ankle and
to.
have it just snap again.
Yeah, jeez.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do you have any honorable mentions?
Yeah, I mean, one honorable mention, Nico Jari. He was given a year-long doping ban. I mean, technically it was 11 months, but in 2020 he got a year-long doping ban essentially. And he was able to climb back into the top 150 in the second half of 2021 when he returned. But then he kind of just sat around there in 2022. And then he moved all the way from 152 to number 19 in 2023. So pretty crazy because he was a good player before the doping ban. And then it seemed like he might just be mediocre after he came back from it. But this year he was able to step it back up to that top level.
Yeah, he was exciting to watch. And as you know, and as a lot of the listeners know, I could not stop talking about Jari over the summer. Like he was kind of my favorite guy for a bit. So it's fun to see him, especially after the suspension, actually, really make a name for himself. Because I don't know how familiar you were with Jari before his suspension, but I hadn't really heard of him too much. So for him to come back better than before was, pretty impressive and definitely deserves the honorable mention.
100%. 100%. Another honorable mention I wanted to bring up was Jan Leonard Struff. I mean, he was a former top 30 guy, and then he fell kind of out due to injuries. Obviously, this year comes back, makes this massive run at Madrid, makes it all the way to the final in a Masters 1000 tournament, which is a crazy accomplishment for anyone. And he also made the final in Stuttgart. So 2 different surfaces and makes the final in both. So pretty crazy. And then kind of the second half of the year, he had injuries. He missed Wimbledon. I think he missed the US Open too. But it was still a good year for him, I think, because he went from a guy that was like, okay, he's on the back half of his career, like he's falling backwards, to all of a sudden he comes back and he's moving up again.
Yeah, the Stroop waffle. Love that German guy. Yeah, I mean, you pretty much covered it. I couldn't agree more. And just like Jari, I was pretty high on Struff too. What did I say? He'd be ranked top 20 by the end of the year. I
I
think I
think you
might
said
have
that about Jari.
Jari.
And
Okay,
I
so
think he nailed it because he moved to
I
19.
think he nailed to at 19. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So it was a pretty good bet. And I remember when you said that, I was like, I don't know.
yeah,
I was like, maybe top 30, but I don't know about top 20. And then he ended up getting there. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I was
yeah,
wrong about that one, but
yeah.
that's how it goes.
All right, on to the next.
Yeah. Another one kind of similar, but less focused on the dropping out and coming back. Just most improved player. I'm going to go with Chris Eubanks on this one. I mean, at the age of 27, sixth year of being a pro player, moves from outside the top 120 to number 34, and actually peaked in the top 30 this year. So I think it's just crazy to see a guy that's never really had that top level. Because the thing about the comeback players is like they were at the top level and they were able to return to it. Eubanks, we'd never seen this level out of him before. And he's able to perform, win his first career title, make a deep run at Wimbledon, and just emerge, especially in the grass court season, as a guy that can contend with the best players in the world.
Yeah, had some big wins too. Like remember against Tsitsipas?
Exactly.
So he is capable. He's definitely, not someone that you could just walk over anymore. I'm also going with an American, Ben Shelton. So he is the most improved player in my opinion because he started the year off at 96 and ended at 17. And he even got his first title this year in Tokyo. Let's see, he made it to the quarterfinal of the Australian Open. And that was only his second slam too. His first time outside of the country, second slam. I remember his first slam was the U.S. Open the year before, and he was a first round exit. So that's when I kind of first discovered Ben Shelton. Then he kind of didn't do much. Like he had a weird year, Ben Shelton, because remember he made that incredible run to the quarterfinals in Australia, and then just kind of sat dormant.
Yeah, I remember I made a comment about it during that cold period. I was like,
Yeah.
seems like he's just signing up for tournaments, collecting checks, because he signed up and lost like 9 first rounds, I want to say, and maybe had like a 2-13 record. He was not doing that great. And then he comes to the US Open and just outperforms everybody. Like no one outperformed their expectations as much as he did in that tournament.
Yeah, no, I know. It was kind of rough before, but maybe that's just chalk it up to first year on tour.
Yeah.
Could be.
Especially
But
because he never played like clay tournaments before. So kind of understandable that didn't perform well on
yeah,
clay.
yeah, definitely. And he also had a big win against Yannick Sinner this year too. Made it to the quarterfinals in the Shanghai Masters. And this dude just plays like a big but moves like a small, if that makes sense. Like he's got such powerful strokes and he's got great net ability too and good hands. So that's my pick for most improved player.
100%. And yeah, it looks like he has some momentum going into next year because it wasn't just that he performed at the US Open. It was that he was able to kind of carry that into the next couple tournaments and continue to play pretty well as the year kind of died down.
Yeah, ended at 17. I think he was 15. His career high was ranking 15. So very impressive.
100%. Honorable mention for this category. I'm going to go with a guy that didn't have the biggest ranking move, but I'm going to go with Manarino. At the age of 35, he went from number 46 in the world to a career high number 22, won 3 titles this year, which was more than he had won in the rest of his entire career. He'd only won 2 titles before this year. He consistently was able to beat top level guys and was able to beat guys that are at the highest level. He beat Medvedev and he beat Fritz. So he beat guys that are like at the top level this year. And I just think that he's a guy that nobody's really going to give the respect to in terms of nobody would really put him on a most improved player list, I don't think. But I wanted to give him the love here in the honorable mention.
Yeah, there we go. That's crazy. He reached his career high at age 35.
Yeah, it's pretty insane.
Yeah, because I know you mentioned that in another podcast too about older players kind of reaching their peaks like way later.
Yeah,
I
and
guess
I mean, he turned pro in like 2004, I want to say. So he's been like on tour forever.
was that when he
And
had hair?
probably, I mean, he was what, 17 at that
Yeah.
point. So I'd
Jeez.
assume, but I think it's just crazy to see a guy like him at 35 make a jump like that.
Yeah, another honorable mention player here for most improved player, FAA. Was that a bad joke?
Oh my God. Is there like an opposite category? But I don't want to go too hard on
I know,
FAA,
I know.
man. I've
I was
already
gonna
done it
say I
enough.
had it was too tempting. I had to. Oh man. No, that's a good honorable mention.
Yeah. So not FAA, but moving on to match of the year. I am going to go with, I think what was the best match of the year in terms of quality. Maybe it wasn't the most significant in terms of the prestige that came with it. But like I mentioned earlier, my match of the year is Djokovic versus Alcaraz in the Cincinnati Masters final. It's not Wimbledon. We all know people think Wimbledon was the match of the year, But in my opinion,
Yep.
this was the better match. Let's just go with a breakdown of it. Djokovic broke him early, then got broken back and that lost that first set. And it really looked like Djokovic had nothing in the tank. It was a hot day and he was struggling with the conditions. And I think that built in more into the idea of like, people like, okay, Djokovic is getting old. Alcaraz is coming on. Alcaraz is going to beat him again. And it's Djokovic is done pretty much. And then Djokovic is able to turn that switch in his mind like he did in that 2021 French Open final against Tsitsipas. And he's able to go, no, I'm not done. Comes back in that second set. He's down a break in the second set, takes it back, takes the second set in a super tight tiebreak. Super tight. I think it was like 11-9. And then goes into that third set, goes up a break. And in terms of quality, I think this was the best tennis. If there was just a set of the year, I think you have to say that this was maybe the best set of tennis of the year, just because there were so many crazy rallies from these two guys, just insane levels of athleticism. I mean, there was that match point for Alcaraz where he made like 3 crazy saves, made like a sliding up the line shot to save match point. It was just insane. But Djokovic got up a break and he had multiple match points, both at 5-3 and at 5-4. Gets broken. Alcaraz forces it all the way to a tiebreak again, but then Djokovic ends up taking it. I just think it was a spectacular match to watch, and I don't think it gets much better than that match.
Yeah, definitely. That's kind of funny that for it not being a Grand Slam final, it's one of those matches that I specifically remember, like where I was, what I was doing while I was watching. And I honestly can't say that for a lot of matches. So this is definitely a memorable match. One
100%.
that
Yeah.
one that will go down in the books. But I'm gonna go with the more prestigious matchup, the Wimbledon final this year, the Djokovic Alcaraz. So it wasn't as tight, I would say. We had Djokovic just completely dominate in the first set. He took it 6-1. Second set was a lot tighter. Alcaraz ended up taking that one in the breaker. And then the third set had the infamous 26-minute game. And
That was crazy.
yeah, it was pretty nuts. I mean, what was it? 32 points, 13 deuces, just all around crazy. Djokovic, so Alcaraz won the third, Djokovic took the fourth, 6-3. And we have a 5 set. This was our first or the only slam of the year that went into 5 sets.
Yeah.
So yeah, Alcaraz took the fifth, 6-4, and he won his first Wimbledon title.
I'm thinking about that now. Was this the only Grand Slam final of the year that went more than 3 sets?
Yeah, it was
Because
actually.
because
Yeah.
Djokovic beat Tsitsipas, right, in 3 in Australia. He beat Rude in 3 in the
Easy
French, right?
3, yeah. Yeah,
And then he
yeah.
beat Medvedev in 3 in the US
And
Open.
3. Uh-huh.
That's
Yeah,
pretty
so
crazy. So Djokovic won 11 out of 14 sets.
jeez.
Pretty
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
But
That is crazy. When the perspective, man, it's nuts.
yeah. I
They
mean,
say, football is a game of inches, and then tennis is a game of actual like millimeters.
yeah, exactly. 100%. And I understand. I mean, this pick makes sense as the match of the year. Like I obviously I believe in that my pick is the best,
Mhm.
but I think that the Wimbledon final, if you're going on prestige, if you're going on the pressure these guys feel, I think you can't compare. Wimbledon is the biggest tournament of the year. Like
Right.
and there's no argument. That is the most prestigious, and Djokovic needs it. He has so much pressure on him. Alcaraz is like, I can't let this guy beat me again. It was so much hype around it, and it delivered.
Yeah, I mean, to each their own. I picked it as a good feature with these two. Whenever it's Djokovic and Alcaraz getting together, you're hopefully gonna have a good match.
Yeah. And for honorable mention, I remember I think I said one a few weeks ago, and I was like, this was the match of the year. It wasn't Alcaraz and Djokovic. But to be honest, I don't remember what match it was now. So clearly it wasn't the match of the year. But then I was looking at some lists of like other people's matches of the year to see if I could jog my memory on any matches. And I completely forgot about the Murray Berrettini match in Australia because it feels like so long ago. Obviously, it was the beginning of the year, but it was a crazy match, first round, and it was just insane. Murray took a 2-set lead. Berrettini battled back, took the third. I remember watching this match and I was like, oh no, Murray, you can't blow this. And then Berrettini it takes the fourth in a close tiebreak. I'm like, this is just over. And then somehow Murray takes it in the tiebreak in the fifth. Just an insane win for Murray. I remember being so hyped for him. And I think it's just incredibly impressive, especially considering how old Murray is at this point.
Yeah, no, that is a good honorable mention. For me, I didn't really have a specific honorable mention because it was kind of tough. Like you said, we have matches of the week every single week that are crazy. And I remember speaking about them, but they just kind of fall like every other match. And for me, it was kind of hard to pick a match of the year that wasn't a title, a final. So drop a comment on your favorites because I need to jog my memory.
But yeah, moving on to player of the year. This is the big one. And I think there's no real competition. You have to go with Djokovic for player of the year.
What?
I mean,
No
3 Grand
way.
Slams, 2 Masters 1000, wins the ATP finals, has 7 total titles, 56-7 record on the year. Like, that's just crazy for a guy his age to do. And I had to say, like, just because it's expected doesn't mean it's any less impressive. Like, he's still the player of the year, even though the expectations on him are so high.
Yeah. Enough said. I mean, undisputed player of the year. I really can't disagree.
Yeah.
I feel like this is really the only award that we have that's not subjective. Like you could have a clear answer. It's very objective. Djokovic is the player of the year, right? I mean, how else would you categorize player of the year? Like, is there any argument for other guys?
Well, I think it comes down to how, obviously, I just kind of said how I defined player of the year, and it's just like who performed best in like all the tournaments they played in. And that's where like my honorable mentions come in, because like Alcaraz, I mean, he was the number 1 player in the world. So he had high expectations, but even he, I don't think had as high of expectations as Djokovic did. And you could argue he was the player of the year because he established this wasn't a fluke. I didn't just win a Grand Slam because Djokovic wasn't there. Obviously, beat Djokovic in Wimbledon. He made the semifinal of every slam he played in, won 2 Masters 1000 titles and 6 total titles. And I think, honestly, through the first half of the year, I think he probably was the player of the year because he had won 6 titles after Wimbledon. He had won his 2 Masters 1000. He had beaten Djokovic in a Grand Slam. And he also missed a good portion of that first half of that season because of injury. So if he'd been able to carry that, I think he could have an argument for player of the year because he would have a Grand Slam and have missed a Grand Slam. So then it would be arguable, I think. But I don't think it is because of how the end of his year went.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that he had a year like this and he still wasn't like undisputed. But I don't know. Has anyone else through years in the past, can you think of anyone that has had a year, as good as Djokovic this year?
I mean,
right off the top.
Djokovic has had it in the past. I mean, you look at it like 2021, he had a pretty comparable year. 2015, he had a pretty comparable year. Even 2011. I mean, Djokovic has had like this season was insane for Djokovic. And I don't think it was even his best year.
Jeez.
Which is just crazy to say. So
well, do you think that's a negative for the sport then? This year's best player, it wasn't even his best year.
Okay, I see what you're saying. The best player isn't a guy in his prime.
Correct, basically. And I'm just thinking, okay, like the competition was way better in 2011 than it is now. Would you say that or no?
I think the competition was different. I think you had Federer and Nadal, and you had some other top guys. I think now it's like just Djokovic, and he's trying to fend off what feels like an army of these younger guys trying to dethrone him.
Yeah.
Versus at that point, it was like Djokovic was competing for that top spot. There were the big 3, and then you had Murray in there, you had Tsonga in there, you had Berdych in there.
Yeah.
You had all these guys that were, I mean, Ferrer too. I don't want to forget about him. Del Potro was in there.
Some respect on my boy Ferrer.
Exactly. I mean, like there's so many guys that at that point were up there, but they weren't like separated in terms of age, really.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. Okay. So did you want to go on? Did you have other honorable mentions?
Yeah. I mean, another guy that if you looked at player of the year differently could have been the player of the year is Sinner. I mean, in terms of guys that outperformed probably expectations, he probably was the number 1 guy just because he was outside the top 10 to start the year, took this massive step up. By the end of the year, he was playing like maybe the best player in the world. I mean, like if you look at the last month or so, like his level was just crazy. And he was able to beat all of the top guys. He made the semifinal in Wimbledon, obviously made the finals in that World Tour finals. He beat Djokovic twice in 2 weeks and end of the year at number 4. I think that if you look at his year in the second half, it's just a crazy level that he was playing at. Like he collected in the same time that Alcaraz kind of took a slight step back, Sinner kind of took that step up.
Yeah, he almost like pounced on.
Exactly. Like after the US Open, Sinner probably played better than Alcaraz. I don't think probably. I think he did play better than Alcaraz.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last guy, obviously, I mean, I think if we're mentioning the 1, 2, and 4 guys, you can't forget Medvedev. I mean, he wasn't really in contention to be the player of the year because he didn't do anything that crazy. I think he had a great year, but nothing that would have made him stand out to be that player of the year. He made deep runs in majors, obviously made the US Open final. He had 5 titles and 2 Masters 1000s in Italy and Miami, one of which was a clay tournament. So obviously that's big for him. And so like, definitely it wasn't a disappointing year for him. Like he had a great year, but I think he was probably hoping for more.
Yeah, this is like the epitome of honorable mention.
Yeah, exactly. Like you did a great, you had a great year. It just wasn't as good as Djokovic's.
Yeah, just runner up, fantastic year.
Exactly.
Yeah, that Miami title was interesting because I never go into tournaments rooting for Medvedev to win the whole thing. It always comes down to like, okay, he's playing this person, he's playing this person. For me, I don't know. I kind of wanted Medvedev to win in Miami just because I know he kind of has roots there. Like one of my buddies, actually an old tennis partner, saw him in a restaurant in Miami and asked to take a picture of them, and Medvedev said no. He said maybe after dinner. So now he has like a hatred for Medvedev.
Dude, I mean, you can't. Did he like go up to him while he was eating?
I think so. Yeah.
Dude, you can't do that.
No, definitely not.
I think your buddy was in the wrong 100%.
I agree. And I think it's funny how people have these stories about why they hate professional athletes. Like so
Yeah.
like I know someone who hates Steph Curry because he just snubbed him on a dub, like when he was walking by him. And now he just passionately hates him.
You're like, dude, he probably didn't even see you. Secondly, like, imagine if you were in his position and you're just trying to eat dinner and like hang out with your friends and family, and some random person you don't know just walks up and is like, hey, can I get a picture with you? You're probably just gonna be like, fuck off, dude.
Yeah, I know.
But,
so yeah, but long story short, I'm glad he won in Miami.
Yeah.
So that includes our 2023 awards.
Yeah.
Award ceremony.
Sounds good. So let's hop into segments. So
Let's do it.
What's new in tennis? What'd you see this week?
Dude, I'm pumped about this one. I mean, I'm not pumped for the actual event, but I'm pumped about this news. So there's going to be a Netflix slam. They just announced this yesterday. So Netflix will be live streaming a sports event. It's going to be Nadal versus Alcaraz, March 3rd in Las Vegas. So it's going to have other matches too. It's not just one match, but those are still TBD. And apparently this is Netflix's second live sporting event. So they had done one with golf players paired up with F1 drivers. I didn't know that.
I clicked
you
on
seem
the
like
first
you
one.
would know that, right?
It was funny because I saw like the description of that one and I thought it was like gonna be just like a mini little coverage of it, like almost like a one event docu-series.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like I thought it was gonna be like going through like hole by hole and being shot like a documentary would be, right? And then I click on it and it's just a live event. I'm like, dude, I don't care enough to watch golf.
Yeah.
I mean, like, this is just watching golf. Like, there's no special thing about this for me. So I just like clicked on it, saw it was just golf, and just clicked off.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's super interesting that Netflix is kind of dipping their toes into sports in general, or live sports too, because they've already done the Drive to Survive, Breakpoint, was it Full Swing, the golf?
Yeah, I mean, no, they have.
So
they're expanding like their whole Netflix sports division.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, it makes sense then because they did do Breakpoint. So another thing though, I kind of feel like this isn't going to happen with Nadal just because of his injury. And it's interesting why they picked those two. I mean, maybe it makes sense because they're both from Spain. They capture a huge global audience, the two, but like, is that the biggest rivalry? If I was Netflix, I'm choosing Alcaraz and
I think,
Djokovic.
yeah, I was about to say, I think there's one reason, and it's because of Djokovic's policy on getting the
Vaccine.
jab.
Yeah. Damn,
So
man.
I think they don't really want to. I think a lot of people don't necessarily support Djokovic because of his stance on stuff like that. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Dude, speaking of Djokovic, do you think he's like blackballed from the media? Because you know how I mentioned a couple weeks ago that he got a new agent where he's trying to take the next step of life after tennis? Because he's always been the villain, you know, he's kind of got to change his personal appearance.
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where like I feel like if you really look at it, he doesn't need to. He has enough fans already, and people will always look at him still as the greatest of all time, or like
Mhm.
at least the most accomplished of all time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I don't think he needs to change his image in order to do that. I think that he already has that locked in, and maybe he feels like he needs to change it. If I was him, I would say, dude, like enough people love you already. Like you don't need
Mhm.
to do anything. You have plenty of money. You don't need to do any sponsorships or anything. Just like get locked in and try to, once you do retire, then try to figure out what your next step is going to be.
Yeah, and I think the fact that he is so, and I don't want to say stubborn, but so like committed to his values is what makes him likable to some people too. Like the fact that he's not willing to change. This is actually funny that just popped in my head. So Aaron Rodgers, you know, how he's kind of, you
Yeah.
know, same wavelength as
Similar.
Djokovic. Yeah,
Yeah.
similar politics, but he nicknamed him. He said on Twitter hashtag Novak's Djokovic.
That's a great one.
I know.
That's
But
a
no, speaking of
very solid
Djokovic,
pun.
I saw an ad for him on 60 Minutes after the football game the other day. I think it was on
Mm,
Sunday. So I definitely
yeah.
want to check out that interview because I didn't see it, but some interesting stuff in the highlight, or not the highlight, but the preview. So
Yeah.
I
I
think it'll
think they
be
definitely asked him about the vaccine.
yeah, well, I think they mentioned something about his mindset. They're like, "Oh, how does it feel to be?" I don't want to misquote it, but they basically said, "You're lucky to have this mindset," and cut the guy off right away. He's like, "No, no, 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 I'm not lucky. Like this,
I
I worked
trained
for.
this.
I
Yeah.
trained for
Yeah. It's
that."
like you can't just, yeah. He's like, I wasn't born with this mindset. Like
Right.
I created it. It's like saying David Goggins was born with that mindset. And then you
Hmm.
talk about like if you've ever read his books, he's always
Yeah.
like, when I was younger, I didn't have this mindset. I was like the opposite of it. And I like was able to become this next level person. Like it's not like you were just born being that way.
For sure. But I know we kind of went off on a tangent, but what do you think about Netflix, this whole thing, this tennis tournament? Like from everything, like the fact that it's Netflix, the fact that it's Djokovic or not Djokovic, sorry. The fact that it's Alcaraz and Nadal, the
I
fact that it's in
mean,
Vegas, like what is this?
to me, it's just like I think it'll be a cool event if you're there. I think it'd be like cool to go and if you're in Vegas and see him play. I don't think it's actually going to be that big of a Netflix event because it's
Mhm.
essentially an exhibition match. Like
Yeah.
nobody's going to care who wins or loses, really.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious to see what the ATP, the USTA, if they're like Netflix is stepping on our toes here and just scheduling
Yeah.
tennis matches.
Well, I
But
mean, speaking on like the organizations, my what's new of the week is there's this idea of the Premier Tennis Tour, which is like all in the news recently. And it's like you actually were talking about this, I think, early in the year with the Grand Slams and all the top tournaments kind of working together to create this like essentially premier level where it's like they're just playing in the big events and there's way less small events for these top level guys so that they don't have to grind as hard and be overworked. They can just play in the massive ones that people are really focused on.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I don't
What are your thoughts? I'm still like kind of digesting
I
this.
don't think it's the best because it would make it so that all the tournaments that were like mid-level, like ATP 500s, I think would suffer a lot
Mm.
because
They wouldn't
guys that
qualify as the top.
I doubt they would qualify as being in the top level, and even if they are included, then that would mean that ATP 250s would be struggling because
Mhm.
there's going to be a cutoff there somewhere. And all of a sudden, the top level guys are only going to be playing in tournaments above that level. And all these tournaments that they used to be able to, or they used to go to, are now just not going to get any of the top guys.
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like that one bit because then you miss out on big upsets too.
Exactly. You don't
Mhm.
see like
Morosion.
yeah, you don't see Morosion. You don't see the Japanese guy in Tokyo. Like that
Oh
just wouldn't
yeah,
happen
yeah,
as
yeah.
much just because he wouldn't get the opportunity to play top guys.
Mm. Yeah. So hopefully that doesn't happen. This
Yeah.
is
We'll see. Or at least if it
we'll
does happen,
see.
they
So
would
it's
still continue to
mhm.
play in the lower level tournaments.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Bet of the week. Not much action here, huh?
Yeah, I mean, last week we kind of said no bets and then went with a bunch of bets that were like possibilities. So this week I just kind of wanted to look for a bet that was like possible for the upcoming year. And one of the ones I saw was Hurkacz being plus 175 to be the ace leader in 2024.
Mm.
And I feel like this is just a lock because he was ahead by so much this year. Obviously, he could have like an injury, but outside of that, I don't really see anyone passing him in the next year. I mean, you have guys like Shelton. I saw him on this list. He was like plus 1,000. So he was like a
Mm.
crazy underdog. But I feel like unless someone like him makes a crazy step up, no one's going to pass Hurkacz next year.
Yeah, I agree. I like that bet because I was also looking at this list and there was no one other than Hurkacz where I was like, oh yeah, like that's a possibility.
Yeah,
Like it was just, Hurkacz and then steep drop off.
exactly.
I think
100%.
Bublik was, one of the top
Yeah.
contenders too.
Yeah. And you
But
just, I feel like Hurkacz just has
yeah,
it
I'm not.
locked up. But
Yeah, I mean, unless he just something happens, like you said, maybe an injury or where he just doesn't play in certain tournaments. But
hmm,
I think that's all his.
yeah. What about you?
Yeah, my bet of the week, I'm going with something pretty interesting. So I'm taking Novak Djokovic, the over 1.5 ranking at the end of 2024 for plus 110. So basically, I'm betting that he's not going to be number one ranked at the end of the 2024 season.
So he's a favorite
He's a
to be
favorite.
number one.
Yes. And
That's,
for him to be number one was minus 150.
I mean, that's a crazy bet. I think that the odds there's so many things that can happen in a year of tennis. I mean, think of how close it was this year. And then you go to next year and Alcaraz is only improving and Djokovic is only getting older and all these young guys are continuing to just push him. I feel like it's going to be tough for him to just continue to hold on to that as the years go on. But we've also seen, I mean, you look at someone like LeBron this year, not to bring him up again, but this year in the NBA, he's like 25 games in and he's averaging 25 points, 8 assists, and 7 rebounds still, and shooting better than he has in like the last 5 years. So you never know what's going to happen with the advancements they're having in like health and keeping people at the high level until they're getting old.
Yeah, this will be an interesting one because I know I'm definitely gonna forget in like 8 months that I even placed this bet.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
just gonna wake up one day and have more money in my account and be like, wait, what?
Or
Or
just be
less,
like the
honestly.
odds, you just see the odds completely shift and you're like, oh, I'm just going to cash this one out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure
Djokovic
it'll be
like
a lot of
loses
cash.
second round at Australian Open. You're like, cash out right now.
Easy money. All
Exactly.
right. Next segment.
Well, I mean, match of the week, I'll be honest, there
Mm,
were no ATP matches. It's the end of the
yeah.
year.
It's a weird time, man.
So maybe next week we can go with like a historical match. People
Yeah.
can maybe let us know if they want to see that. But I
Yeah.
think that might be a cool idea. But I think, I mean, obviously there were no matches of the week this week because there were no ATP matches. So
I know.
it's a
It's
bummer,
crazy,
but
man.
yeah, we
I'm
gotta
just
wait
so used
until
to
Australia.
I can't wait, man. I feel like my daily routine is just out of whack now because
Yeah.
I can't watch tennis TV.
Well, it's an 11-month season, and then all of a sudden,
Yeah, I know.
the one
We're
month off, you're
spoiled.
like, "What's
Yeah,
going on? What's going on?"
I know. Because any other sport, like when it's not football season, I'm just like, can it be football already?
Yeah, yeah, and it's so much shorter of a season that it's
Hmm.
like you get used to it. Like by about July, you're like, okay, I'm kind of ready for football to be back, but like I'm locked. Like
Hmm.
I don't expect to see it every week.
Yeah, and I'm also the thing about tennis is you don't need to be like watching every single match. You would go insane because there are, tournaments every single week, multiple matches every single day. So it's a nice sport when it is in season to just kind of check in on it when you want. I feel like it's kind of like baseball, like, there's so many games and then you just check in the postseason.
Yeah, you check in and you're like, oh yeah, they won about 7 games since I last checked.
Uh, All right, and that's the show. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube at Painting Lines Podcast. Feel free to shoot us a DM or email us any questions or thoughts at paintinglinespodcast@gmail.com.